All right. We did it. How's it going, guys?
Nice. Good, hey, Chris. How are you doing? Hey, Andy.
Good. July 21st, Dev Talk Show, 8:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern. Sun kind of going down here in the Northeast, right?
Yeah.
I had to check.
It's getting earlier and earlier. You know, we're be close to 8 o'clock soon at this point.
Yeah. Coming out of summer where here 9 o'clock is it's kind of nice. Still play catch. But that's ending.
Yeah.
That's ending. Halcyon Tribble is here.
Awesome.
Good to see you. With a mixer blueberry. I like to see that. So thank you for that one. It's the Dev Talk Show. Rich Ross, Andy Schwam. How you guys doing? I will shut up and let you tell me what's going on this week.
That's a good thing.
But I didn't pick which one. That was for you to decide.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not like we like to step on each other. So yeah, I'm actually having fun. I'm doing a hackathon this week with a customer. So I'm having a good bit of fun learning some, helping them through some Azure and some machine learning. So it's been a fun. Anytime we can have that kind of a relaxed type of a session with the customer, where we just get to talk, help them see what's possible out there with the tools. That's always makes for a fun week. So I'm having a blast.
Cool. How's it going, Andy?
It's going pretty well. It's been interesting lately. I think I told you guys my kids are away, and so that's been kind of really kind of wild. And this past weekend, my wife and I took a little trip down to Maryland to St. Michael's in Maryland. If you guys have been there, it's just a really cool little chill kind of harbor town, I guess you'd call it. There's some marinas, and we stayed in a little bed and breakfast and had some food. And I'm not a relaxed person per se, right? And I might still seem stressed at times to you guys, and anxious about things or whatever. That's just my personality. But I'm about as mellow as I get these days. This is pretty good.
Nice.
So it's house to yourself, and things are mellowed out. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, in addition to the kids being away, like your wife, my wife's a teacher, and so she's off for the summer. So she's gone away for a few days, a couple times. So I've actually had the whole house to myself a few times. And tonight she's out as well, which is not that big a deal. She'll be back a little later, but she's gone on a couple of overnights with some friends. I mean, I've really been able to just chill out. I'm watching TV. I'm watching this great Paul McCartney thing on Hulu. Have you guys seen that?
No, I have not. It's on my list.
Okay.
What'd you think?
Oh, it's really good.
You're a huge Beatles fan.
Yeah, I love the Beatles. Yeah. I mean, I have John Lennon there behind me, but I tell you what, anybody watching who, if you have Hulu and you like music, even if you're not that much of a Beatles fan, if you like music, Paul McCartney just starts to talk about sort of how some of the songs came to be, and they put the mixes up and different instruments, and it's just cool to watch a little peek into what goes on in deep in his mind a little bit, about the recording process and making music and the Beatles and stuff. It's like a really cool 6-part interview, they're like 35, 40-minute segments.
Nice. Yeah, right. Cool. Well, that sounds like a recommendation there.
Definitely.
I'd give it thumbs up.
Yeah, that's cool.
Try Goofy. Oh my gosh, 5 weeks without the wife and dogs for house construction. It was fun for like a week. Yeah.
No.
It does get a little weird. It gets a little weird when you're on your own. I don't know if you guys have experienced it, but it's a little weird. It's good for the first, couple of days, and then I just start to be like, huh, where's everybody? Where are my kids? But Rich, your daughter's off in college, right? So I mean, that's a different story for you.
Yeah,
a little bit, yeah. And it's just me in the apartment here, so I'm kind of on my own normally. So it's there's a lot of that.
Yeah. Hey, cool. Statue's here tonight too.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Friend of the show.
Yeah.
taught us about F#. That was an awesome show. That was a really awesome show. We'll have to do that again and learn more about how we can use functional programming instead of building big balls of mud, right? So, in any case, speaking of building big balls of mud, right? Like we were talking a little bit earlier today about what's a topic that we might consider, and we were talking a little bit about. So there's a little bit of tangents here. We built some balls of mud in F# too. Don't worry, that's from Stashu there. We talked a little bit about if it's possible, or have you been in a situation where maybe you've been on a team at work that's too small or too big, or how do you build them up, or decide just how many people should be on a project? And I had to admit that it's not always something you're in control of. So I don't know that it's relevant to say like, hey, you can take this to work, because you could just go change. You can just go change the the size of your team. That's not really how it works, right? But it's interesting to think about what might be effective. And so I don't know if either of you have experience, if this is the kind of thing you do is build teams and decide who's going to be on it and what you need, and maybe where we fall short there, because we all have to work together at work. We don't get to work alone. At home, we get to, if you're having fun and learning stuff, get to do it on our own. But at work, that's pretty rare, I think, for most people.
Yeah, right. To clarify, I think what you're thinking there, even if you work at home alone, I think you're still saying, but you're on a team, right? So like,
oh no,
we're not talking about actually being in the building together, right? This could be, working alone. Right?
I wasn't really talking about remote. I was saying like, sometimes you might want to learn something, just have some fun, right? Or you want to learn a new topic or something. Now you're alone. You do whatever you want. You follow all the coding practices you like. You name things the way you like it. No one's going to argue with you. It's the way you want things done. But that's not very realistic. That's not what happens at work. So I'm curious if there's insight on can it get unwieldy? Can you have too many people? What kind of things can be the problem? And then maybe how you mesh together with teammates might be. Is that pretty confined? I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Rich, if you want to jump in, I mean, I was going to say, if you noticed, if you're a watcher, fan of the show, or you guys certainly know, I've got opinions on everything. Right? No. I certainly have some thoughts about these things. This is a topic where there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Different things work for different groups, right? But I can jump in with a bunch of stuff. But Rich, you're going to say something, so why don't you go ahead and talk about it?
So I'm kind of. I don't do the traditional development stuff anyway. So I have a team. I have a team of colleagues of mine who we work with. And I guess in that team, it's kind of structured, I guess, how you might think about structuring what you need for whatever project you're working on, right? Everybody has their own discipline. Everybody has the thing that they're kind of responsible for. But I think what helps us and be a great team is that there's also overlap, right? So while I tend to focus on the app dev stuff, I can do a little bit of the infrastructure stuff. I understand security enough to be dangerous. Those kind of things where we can kind of play into each other's fields a little bit. And I think that's what makes a great team, because then it doesn't matter who or what needs to get done. You've got others who can jump into it if they've got the time to lend a hand there. So I think that that's kind of the experience I'm coming from building a team at this point. I'm trying to recall back to when I was doing consulting and how some of those teams came together and some of those experiences. So, but that's right now. That's kind of what I'm thinking top of mind.
So I like that concept of overlap. I liked when you said that, because there's something, right? You could be working on something, and maybe would it be a mistake for everybody to own a piece of it? Or is it helpful? Not saying everybody has to know everything. That might not be realistic, but is it helpful? Do you find that, sure, one person might know a piece of it the best, but at least someone else kind of gets it or can tinker with it or can help when they're not there.
Yeah, definitely. I don't. I always, for some reason, I always made this analogy to, and Star Trek is the one video game I'm thinking of where everybody had their skills, right? Picard was the leader, and if you and there were certain things that he had, and you had other people you would set for your away team, and you kind of put them all together. It's like, all right, this is what I can go and get past this mission with. And it was kind of that same thing when you build a team together to do development, right? You want to make sure you've got the right skill sets together, and sometimes they overlap, and that's great. But at least you want to make sure you have all of the things you're going to run into as you start to build out that project.
Yeah. So, can it get too big, and how do you know? And has that ever happened? Have you? Because I have. So here's why I bring it up, and maybe it's a unique experience. Yeah. Not to talk about the details, but I have been on a team that got so large, and the team was doing stand-ups, that even a stand-up where you were trying to move quickly, I mean, we're talking like there were a dozen people reporting, and it just gets away from you to where it's really hard for me to pay attention to what everyone else is doing. And so you don't. At least I didn't. And maybe you even find yourself starting to form teams within that team inadvertently. The three people sort of like, well, so we're kind of working on this. And so it's almost like you're organizing yourself because the organization that's been set out has failed you a little. And I was starting to think about, like, how do you know when it's gotten to that point? And what even allows that to happen other than maybe some panic that it's not going to get done. So add more people. I don't know if that's,
and we know how that works.
Sure. Right. Like Fred Brooks says that it makes the project later.
Right.
So,
right. And have we, and maybe we haven't, I don't know, when you say, the team getting too big, I often go back to when I was, working in one of the, a couple of big enterprises. Like, we've got a big project, we've got this enterprise application we're putting together, and you had all of these people around it, with, some with their role, some with, they were part of a team, each had tasks, that kind of thing. But those big projects, they were fraught with issues just because they were so big. And with Agile and Scrum and things along those lines, are we still doing those? Or is it, it's part of a bigger application, but we're just going and doing off this little piece of it? And I don't know if you guys have some recent history that you might be able to share around those.
I think we tend to do things. When I say we here, I don't even mean me at my job or my organization, but I think we as an industry tend to work a little differently now. And when we work on really big projects, I think we again, the big we there, I think I'm seeing more of like small teams that make up a big team. I don't see as much as where everybody's on the same team. I see like, okay, this team is working on this aspect, this team is working on that aspect, and another team is working on the other aspect. And that keeps the team size small, right? It introduces its own problems. But I think that's a difference than what I've seen in the past, where it's like, okay, 20 people are on a team or 30 people are on a team or whatever. I mean, I guess it depends, right? Because some people, that might be their small team, 20 people. I don't know. But I think that, that's where you get in agile terms, right? Or in Scrum terms, you get that like Scrum of Scrums kind of concept, because I think people like to tend to work in those smaller teams. Yeah. I do think a team can get too big. And I think that, the only way to know, I think, when a team's getting too big, I don't think this is a software problem, so to speak, right? Or like a developer problem that a team is too big. I think it's a communication problem when a team gets too big. I mean, again, I could be wrong. I'm just throwing out this hypothesis. But I think it's a communication problem, why we like to have smaller teams. And so And so when you start to have communication problems, that's when you start to say, like, this isn't working right. Not everybody's on the same page. We're having trouble keeping up with all the changes. Like it's getting confusing. I think that's a big part of it. I don't know. Do you guys agree with that theory?
I definitely think there's some merit to it, and that when you lose that ability to communicate, you lose that ability to understand where you are and what needs to get done and who needs support, who's.
Oh, did somebody go back?
Background noise.
That's all right. Don't worry about it.
I'm sorry.
That's because I turned the volume down. So there's having communication be that pulse of how the project's going, whether things are going well or people are starting to maybe churn a little bit on something. Being able to keep those lines of communication open. And I'll just be quiet because I lost the train of thought I was going with there. Sorry. there was something else I was going to take that in a direction, and I can't remember where it was.
I like personally working with small teams. Now, again, things dictate those possibilities, like the size of the things that you're working on and the applications and stuff like that. But I think what's the right team size? I don't think there's a single answer to that question, right? But I like Agile, as I said before, and I like the Scrum methodology and that kind of stuff. And so we tend to have a couple of developers on a team, a QA on the team. We're talking about makeup. I mean, I think a team. This is a topic we can go into. Do teams have just developers, and then there's another team that's the QA team, and you sort of pass things over to them? Or do you have your QA embedded? And I'm sure there are success stories on both sides of things. But I like a team that has, a few developers, a BA, a QA, a business owner. One person is the Scrum Master, usually one of those people or whatever. Some people feel like that's a dedicated role. I feel like it's not. But, whatever. Lots of opinions on things like that. But I feel like, once you get into, and you have to balance that, by the way. You can't have more developers than you can have testers for, and you can't have more developers than, the BA can't be running around. So you have to achieve that balance, and that might be different for different teams, depends on the application you're building. So teams might have, anywhere between 2, 4, 5 developers, maybe 1 or 2 testers. That seems to be I tend to think 2 or 3 devs to a tester usually works. But again, it really depends on what you're building and how much manual testing you need or how much, the tester can do, right. It's a tough formula. It's not an exact science there. And I think that level of team, that size, allows for a good level of communication where the team can know what the rest of the team is doing, right? And then the team, so I think when you get into a large team of, I'm going to make up, I'm picking a number, I'm saying 20, okay? 20 people on a team. I think you start to get into competing priorities when you have a large team or a larger team, meaning that not everyone on the team is aware of what really the most important thing to be done is. Now, again, I'm generalizing here. Somebody might say, oh, no, we have 20 people, and yeah, we have number 1, we have a number 2. Oh, okay, I'm not arguing with that. I'm simply saying that I think it starts to introduce that problem of maybe prioritization and you also get into, listen, the more, I guess I'm going on and I'm introducing new topics along the way, but the more, if you're following some kind of agile process and you want to deploy things at the end of the sprint, if you have 20, 30 developers on a team, that's a lot of stuff happening. That's a lot of moving parts, right? That have to sort of synchronize and sync up for the deployment and things like that. Could work. I'm not saying it doesn't work. But I find that that allows us, and but again, I like multiple small teams, right? So everybody might be working together on different aspects of things, and that's sort of a little bit of my thought process.
Yeah, I think it might be less the number and more going back to what you're thinking around communication and how we work together, and are we overall still being productive and moving things forward. That number could, for some groups, could be 3 or 4. For some groups, because they've been working together and they've got, a good sense of how to work together as a team, that number could get kind of larger. So I think even if it does get larger, one of your other comments around, you might break off into smaller teams, that self-organization, I think, is really important for the project as well, right? Because I think in general, we all kind of have this common thread coming through this, that, a smaller team may just seem to work together, and, having that ability to go off and do that, to focus on something, kind of puts things in the right, keeps things moving in the right direction, even though it's part of a larger team.
So there's a couple of themes that I think I got here. A little bit earlier, Rich said overlap. And this is going to sound like a little bit of an aside, but maybe we can help somebody who's listening right now. And I'm not saying you necessarily have to be newer or senior, doing this a long time, but if you ever get to that place, like if you're thinking that I want to really know one piece of this well, and I'm willing, and I'm going to be the specialist in it so that I'm like irreplaceable, like you think it's some form of job security, I would say think about what Try Goofy's saying here. It depends. No one wants to be woke up at 2 a.m. when there's a problem. So the more hands in the code, the more you can spread support. And I think that is kind of, it's also stating where overlap is valuable. Like my advice to you, if you are listening to us, is do your best to make sure that what you know is shared with your team. Don't try to become the expert because, and it's not because like, and I'm just let's be selfish about it. This isn't about the company worrying about losing you. This is more about that if you think that's what's going to keep you, I got news for you. I've seen people that you thought were indispensable be an unfortunate part of a layoff, and within 2 weeks, whatever they were doing is picked up. So that's not it.
Well,
right?
Yeah, let me pile on that a little bit too.
Yeah.
No one's indispensable. Okay,
right.
You said that, right? And I'm with you on that. But you know who's less? Who's more indispensable? Who's more indispensable? I wanted to make sure I got my negatives right there. The person who shares all their knowledge. That person is more into. That's the person that, as a manager, you're looking and going, well, gosh, we have to make some cut. Let's just say, we have to make some cuts. The hoarder, who's all what about his job security? Or the person who trains and teaches and mentors and shows the rest of the team what to do. So I guess I would go so far as to say it not only are you're making yourself, becoming the sole source of information on a particular topic. Not only is it not necessarily helping you keep your job, I say it's working against you. Right. So like in an obvious way, but we can come back to, there were some other topics you were throwing out.
So overlap was one word. And then you said, Andy, and then you caught it as you said it, prioritization. So that got me to thinking, I'm defining a team for the purpose of this as nothing more than just the group of people you get together, maybe for a daily stand-up. I'm not saying that your organization always does daily stand-ups, but I think a lot do. That's the team. I'm not saying it's right or that the division of labor is correct among the company. It's just that that's who they've put. They've said these 5, these 8, these 3. That's that team is now got to do something, and I don't even really care what it is. And I kind of say that just because we had in the chat, like, are you defining team as a product or a feature? I'm not defining it. That's part of what we're trying to figure out.
Right.
What we're trying to figure out is like, when do you get this right? When do we get it wrong? Because I think it's wrong a lot. So I wanted to zero in when you said prioritization. That got me thinking. Maybe a team is a group of workers that prioritize, a group of employees, a group of team members, where prioritizing what they're doing, like, it makes sense. Because you said I think you were kind of leading towards, if it's not clear what the focus of that team is, then maybe the team is too big. I would also say, like, maybe it's just not organized right. If the team can't articulate that they recognize what it is that's the most important thing for them to be doing, and I say that kind of broadly, I don't mean like the minutia, the most important thing for you to get done, then that's a team. And if there's competing priorities, then maybe your division is wrong. That's a hypothesis I just made up. So
yeah, I mean, I think there's something to it. And again, I think on Try Goofy's case, the question about, product or feature, and you were trying to address that. I think, again, that also depends on the size of the product. If a product is somewhat small, a team can support that product, right? If your product you're building is Windows, I think you need to have feature teams, right? I mean, it really depends on the scope. It's kind of hard to define it for all these things, right? Yeah, I think. But Chris, I think that if it's hard to know, like I think your theory is pretty good there.
The other theme that I kept hearing was communication, and that's going to go back to my favorite essay, one of my favorite essays of all time, The Mythical Man Month, which talks about, as the team grows, the burden of communication is one of the primary things that slows it down. Adding to Brooks' hypothesis, I think most people would consider a theorem or law that adding people to a late software project makes it later. And his theme is that the added burden of communication, training and intercommunication. Each worker must be trained in the technology, the goals of the effort, the overall strategy, and the plan of work. And I'm reading that excerpt from the Mythical Man Month. So, which I would say everybody should just take a moment to read sometime, because it's a little contrary to what we hear at work sometimes. And certainly, even when you're the person in charge, it's hard to fight the urge that if you just had a few more people working on this, you could get across the finish line. Right? And what he's trying to say is don't. Yeah. You're going to make it later. So I was looking for some themes, and I liked a team with some overlap, a team that understands its priorities, and a team where communication is effective. And that's a pivot on, just because you're an effective communicator doesn't mean the team communication is effective. And that might be because the priorities aren't aligned. That might just be because you don't have the right people, the right overlap. They can't talk to each other because this person doesn't understand the first thing about a database, like at all, nothing. So there's no overlap. And I'm not criticizing that person. I'm just trying to think of something. And then the other person says, well, I don't know the first thing about the web front end. And so now yes, they can work together, but they're throwing things over the wall at each other because they don't even have an idea. We say that a lot in our industry, throwing things over the wall. And a lot of times we think of it as programmers to QA. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's one way that we think of it. Or it can be team to team. We're building a service and we're throwing that service over the wall and you got to consume it, right? But if your own team members are throwing things over the wall, even if they don't realize they're doing it, wow, you might be in trouble.
Yeah. And some of the, I guess when you say that, what I think of is, having some common rules around what things mean to be done, as a way of preventing that whatever it is they're working on from being say, hey, this is in a state that you can start consuming it, right? Having that ability to define, well, done means, yep, it's your code's checked in, the unit tests, it passes all of the necessary things it needs to get back to the branch, whatever it is you do for your DevOps process, as it were. Having that as a common requirement across the team, especially as the team gets large, that will kind of prevent some of that from happening.
I
As we're all
am
kind of reading
going.
the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to put. Let's see. I'm going to get something that was said here, and I'm going to ask. I want to make it clear that I am completely stealing this point from Try Goofy here. So he says, we design our backlog from file new project around scaling teams, right? Figuring out how to scale up and out teams and developers as we move through development. Early in the project, plumbing is not as scalable. Adding features and tabs in a spa is very scalable. So what I want to kind of pivot on is simplifying that a bit. This doesn't happen very often, I don't think. How often do we get to actually hit file new project? And at that point, is that a 1 or 2 person job and then you're going to add later? And I'm stealing that because I heard him say that earlier today, not on the stream. Because I mean, sometimes people might know people and might chat with them. And I thought it was a great point that I don't want to take credit for, because I'll be honest, I haven't had that file new project opportunity very often. It's very often you're coming into something that's in progress. And so I don't know. I've just been trying to draw on where does that come from? Does it happen a lot? And in those early days, when it says here, like figuring out how to scale up and out teams, do you scale up from just 1 or 2 that kind of get the ball rolling? I don't know.
I think that's hard at a lot of companies. It's an interesting idea, okay, but it kind of depends on how you manage the teams, overall across the board. Dynamic team size could be a really good thing. It could also be problematic for certain teams. So it really kind of depends, right? But I mean, I agree with the point, right? I think Try Goofy makes an interesting point here, is that like maybe at a certain point you only need 1 person on the team, okay? But and you could add people to the team later. Typically, an example of how that would work more in the teams I'm familiar with is that the team size is static, right? There's 5, 6 people on the team, right? It's just that maybe 1 person starts on this particular project, right? Because it's not a project. Again, it depends, right? Earlier was a question about, are you a team for a product or a feature? But now it sounds more like you're talking about a project, right? Which is a third thing altogether. But in my teams, they tend to be able to work on multiple projects. And so part of the team might be wrapping up a project, and another person might go off and start the next project and say, well, listen, while the testers are really busy working with the developers and wrapping up that last project, I'm going to go do and file new and start that other bit of work, right? And it's going to be a while before I have something to deploy out for testers or something like that. Doesn't mean I'm not writing unit tests along the way, right? There's different types of testing, but you can do that, and I think that's a good way to do it. Now, I think Try Goofy's talking, maybe if I'm interpreting it correctly, about actually changing the team size, and it really depends on the company you work at. But to me, that becomes really, really tricky to swap that around like that all the time.
Yeah. I mean, having seen, and there's there are things that we do with customers. There's a hackathon type scenario we do with customers. It's more challenge based, right? So you've got 5 or 6 people in this group, self-organized. Maybe they're with the same company, maybe they're not, but they're basically self-organized. And where things typically start is kind of where Try Goofy is mentioning, like, all right, so whoever it is, somebody gets appointed, you're going to do the file new project, get that created, and then once that's there, we know we've got to then create 3 APIs that are related to, that are part of this project. You take this one, you take this. So you do start to, you have to start from some central core. Somebody's got to do that, I suppose we all could, and the merging would happen and it would just kind of correct itself. But ideally, one person does it, and then we all just basically then say, all right, this is our starting point. We can go from here. So I do see that happening even in teams that are just forming and going down that path.
Yeah, I guess, and I'm looking more, at the chat, what Try Goofy's saying. Maybe, we do something similar to that, but we might do it differently. And we might be sort of using terminology a little differently from each other too, which could kind of like lead us to thinking we're not saying the same thing. But I'm thinking about a project that we've got going on right now at work. It's bigger than a project. I mean, you could call it an initiative, right? Where there's going to be a lot of teams working on different things. And there are dependencies across those teams. And so while, but I'm still trying to keep the team sizes the same and give different parts of the project to different teams. But essentially, we're sort of doing the same thing by saying, well, team A is going to start on this initiative with their project because everyone kind of needs that thing to be started first. It's going to take a little longer and maybe other teams depend on it and things like that. And so maybe, from a timeline perspective, they're on this initiative before other teams are. But I still think of them as independent teams. That team is going to come on the project sooner. At least that's kind of like I like to keep people as a team. Again, so definition of teams and things like that. You could say, oh, the team size can scale. And we might have said, oh, you only need one developer to do file new project. Well, that's true. Okay. But at the same time, the tester can be working on that team, coming up with test plans and thinking about something. There could be another developer working on the DevOps portion of it or setting things up, right? Certainly there could be a BA on that team that would be helping define the requirements for the project and things like that. So I tend to think that if a developer starts doing something, I think this is where things happen a lot of times. Someone says, well, just put a developer on that project, right? And I'm using a quote, just put a developer on that project. Well, what's a project? Again, they're saying, well, let the developer get started. We don't need other people yet. We'll need other people later. No, I think that you need a team. I think a team needs to be focused. Some of the members of the team might be doing some other things, and I understand that. But again, I'm a believer in this concept of a team, and that team, sort of travels together and works together.
Yeah.
Is that making any sense? Yeah.
Oh, I think it is. And I think it does feed into, I think something you started when you started talking about the team concept and that file new project piece, we're not all, it's very rare that we all are day one, we're all working on this project, right? And we're starting from there. It's usually, hey, I've got this thing finishing up. Somebody's pinging me about some issue on this other thing. There's all kinds of other work to happen. I'm part of the team, but my percentage of focus on that team might be kind of small at the beginning because of all this other work going on. So I think you're right. Bringing a team together at the beginning, saying, all right, you guys are all going to be working on it. Here's how we're going to start to divide the work out. And that, can be done in such a way that it acknowledges and gives space to those other priorities that the individual person might have to clear the deck too, so that they can really focus on your project. So yeah, I agree. Having that team up front makes sense.
And I do agree with what Try Goofy says. Add teams to a product to develop features. I agree with that. We're building Visual Studio today, right? We're going to start, and someone's going to go and do file new solution called, Microsoft.Visual Studio, right? I mean, fictitious, we're making this thing. Well, we all know there's a lot of things. So someone might start on it, and then we're going to add a team. We're going to say, okay, team B, I would like you guys to develop the tool windows or something like that, right? And team C, you're going to start to develop the debugging aspect of it. I'm making this up, right? But those are teams. Those aren't developers. There's a team that's coming in, and that team is going to bring with it their testers, their BA, their things like that. Yeah. That's just a thought. So we're all looking at the chat here. Try Goofy really, by the way, really engaged in this conversation. And there's no right or wrong. That. So like when I sound like I'm disagreeing with Try Goofy, right. It's not really a disagreement, right? And I'm certainly listening, right? I'm hearing what Try Goofy's saying, because all along I'm trying to figure out, I don't know if this is what you guys do, but like I'll keep making my point, but all along I'm really listening and I'm going, am I wrong? Like I want to know, like maybe I'm wrong. I'm going to keep making my point to find out. Like that sooner or later, I'm going to hit that end of that argument and Try Goofy's going to go, yeah, Andy, but you see that thing you just said? That's where it falls apart. And that's when I go like, oh, right. So it's all part of, like, I like having these discussions and Try Goofy says I'm in 3 streams at once.
Well, so one thing that you said that I thought was interesting is you said that even if your inclination is to have somebody go off and do that early plumbing, that file new project, that on your team, the person or people responsible for QA could still be involved in to start thinking about how, I hate to speak in such broad terms, but we have to, like in how the testing will work. What is it going to look like? How the heck do you even test this thing? Because it's nice that you're focused on getting that in on day one instead of trying to sprinkle it on later, which happens a lot. Like, the software's built and now somebody's got to come along and figure out how to test it. Or I was going to even ask you your typical business analyst role being involved, because I don't know about you two, but I've been on teams where the reality is at least as far as I'm concerned, there is no business analyst. It's 100% developer, although one of them maybe knows the business domain pretty well, like sometimes even really well. 10 years in that particular business domain, almost could be a business analyst themselves. But I've seen that even as skilled as that person is, the business analyst who has the experience in the industry, it's hard to replace that. And I've seen that, like, if they don't have a role, then I don't know. So that's good that you have that. So I've been in situations where it's not there, and that's a challenge. And maybe that's what some people at work are facing, right?
Well, I think a lot of us have been in that place before.
Okay.
Sorry, Rich. Go ahead. No, jump.
That's just a little spin on that, right? So my background out of college was focused on the business side of clinical trials. So I was that subject matter expert for some portion of time, and then switched over and started doing technology and building apps. And at some point, apps that were specifically geared towards supporting clinical trial business processes. And I had a ton of domain knowledge, but what happens is the domain changes over time. And that person who really understands what the latest and greatest is and what that direction is, because they're a little more plugged into that side of it, is that subject matter expert from the business. So it's as much as experience you might have and bring into it, or working in that domain for so long, you still need, even if it's just someone to bounce the ideas and things off of, or to say, no, thinking about this a little bit differently, you need that business person, a domain expert, to come back and be part of that team as you're building this out.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teams on most of the teams in our organization and in a lot of organizations, right? Listen, we all have this ideal team that we think, right? Like I said, a couple developers, a QA, a BA, a product owner. But I would say, even in our organization, some of our teams don't have QA people. Some of our teams don't have BAs, right? Some of them don't have a product owner. There's certainly a mix match of them. I think it works best when we have that whole thing. Now, there are different ways of staging this. I know some organizations that don't believe in having a dedicated QA person. They would say, we have got several developers, and Rich, Chris, and I, we're all 3 developers on a team, and we're going to develop this product, and Chris and Andy are going to be the developers. Rich, I want you to test their code. Not test their code, but test their application, like QA testing, right? And Chris, you're going to test some of the stuff that Andy and Rich work, and so they share the workload that way. It does help because you get away from you don't want to have a developer testing their own stuff. I mean, I believe that developers should write their own unit tests 100%. But doing actual, QA testing is always best done by a third party, I think, right? But I think, some teams can get by without having that. Some teams can get by without having a BA, a business analyst as well. There's some developers that are really good at gathering requirements, working, especially if you have a product owner within the pod that, has that knowledge, and the developer can sort of like pull it from them, right? Or the QA person often is really good at doing that because they need to know what they're going to test. But one of the places I find that teams stumble, particularly in the case without a business analyst. Now, I'm not saying I think a business analyst is more valuable than a QA. I'm not making any judgment here, right? But I've seen developers be sometimes good at doing those other jobs, right? One place where I see it falls apart is when people say, "Oh, the developers, I'll take care of the requirements. I can talk to the business myself," right? What I find happens a lot is you end up with an imbalance of information in the developer's hands that the QA resource is not familiar with, because the developer is going and talking to the business and getting the requirements, and then the QA person's testing the wrong thing because they didn't get that. And when you have that independent BA, they're very good at documenting those things and handing it to both parties and saying, developer, here's the requirement, QA, here's the requirement. It's like having an independent auditor, so to speak, on the process. And I do find that kind of stuff helps. I do find that, sure, people can do multiple jobs, but someone that's good at a job, I think, is a benefit when someone's good at one of those things. Have you guys seen any of those kind of situations yourselves?
I've seen quite often like sort of a dysfunction where there just isn't anyone supplied who can handle that role. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of like needless software iteration, right? Because you can't possibly deliver what's needed because you don't have somebody involved enough to tell you when you're going the wrong way. That unfortunately happens a lot, and I think that's unfortunate. But it happens, and it may be happening to you if you're listening, and saying like, yeah, we could all, like, for instance, if we read Kent Beck's like extreme programming book, and he describes this ideal team that you've mentioned a few times, and I'll tell you, man, that book, they're so happy, and they got the testing and the programmer and there's the scrum master who's protecting the team. I don't know if in that book they call him a scrum master. I don't remember, but they're protecting the team from interruptions. And and then the product owner who they demo to every week so that they can say, yes, you're going the right way, or no, you're not going the right way. And you read a book like that and you say, like, man, it's like listening to a fantasy movie. It doesn't really seem to happen that way at work. So I guess that when you have a deficiency like that, then I don't know. We started off by talking about the size of the team, but it sounds like the makeup is what we all keep landing on, right?
I think with any good team, the makeup is important. I mean, that's, I think that's good. I think that's going to be part of, that's going to make all the other things we talked about kind of happen and be, much more. It's going to make all the other things, the communication, the self-organizing, all the other things would be important, or would just kind of happen naturally if there's, that element of team and camaraderie around that. So,
a topic that kind of fits into this, a pet peeve of mine, and I want to go back to Chris, what you're saying a little bit also about Beck's book about, this perfect team and stuff like that. And I don't know if I'm as quite, pie in the sky about some of these things. And I understand that there are trade-offs and situations that we have to deal with, real world situations that get in the way of sometimes having the perfect team. And that's all part of it. That's all, goes into this stuff. But I do believe in having this team that works together. I believe in that model of having that right individuals, the BA, QA, devs, working together. One of the pet peeves of mine that I really have when we're talking about a team like that is about when some people on the team are not permanently on the team. And I don't mean that they come and go, because that can be okay. But what I mean is when we say, well, this team has 3 developers and let's say 2 testers, right? And one of the developers gets yanked out a lot of times because they kind of work on 2 different teams, right? They're helping both teams. I'm just using this example as the developer. The developer is working on 2 teams. And so I have a real pet peeve kind of problem with that scenario. It doesn't matter if it's the developer, the QA, the BA, but people sort of like sharing workload across teams. And the reason for that comes back to prioritization. And maybe this point fits into this conversation. I think it does. So what ends up happening is Team A is focused on, the feature they're developing, right? Team A is focused on this feature and everybody's working towards it. But one of those developers is also on Team B, and Team B is doing another feature. They're doing something totally different, right? And both teams, let's just imagine, both teams are coming down to crunch time, right? Team A, everything's moving along fine, maybe, right? Maybe Team B, they're not. Maybe Team B starting to get backed up a little bit. And they're saying, hey, developer, we need you on our, we need you more. We can't handle 50% of your time. We need you more. Well, right off the bat, we have a conflict now. What is that person supposed to do? They can help the other team. Sure, that seems like a good idea. But now Team A is suffering, right? Not always, but it can happen that way. And it's suffering in more ways than you think. It's not just that Team A might miss their deadline. You could say, oh, that's okay because Team B's project has a higher priority. Let's just play along with that. Sure, it's more important. But now Team A is built upon this balance that there's a certain amount of work that happens in that team, right? And so all of a sudden that developer gets pulled out, and guess what? There's 2 testers on that team, and now that tester's sitting there waiting and going, well, the thing I'm working on, I'm waiting for the developer to make a tweak to it or a change to it, right? And it really like kind of messes with everybody, right? And it sort of puts unfair burdens on all the people on these teams. And so I hope I explained that scenario well, but that's a pet peeve of mine.
And I mean, it's happened in different projects and things that I've worked on, but what's the way around that? What's the solution to it, right? Because you're not gonna, for some projects, you're not gonna get somebody a full, 100% of the time. I mean, unless that's what you need, in which case you have to figure, there are resourcing constraints, as we say, right? So how do you handle that kind of a situation where you're in that, trying to have somebody balance between 2 projects with equal priority?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, a lot of these problems, I always say, like software development, I don't want to belittle the skill of a software developer. I'm a software developer, right? But I think developer is often the easy part, right? Or the easier part, right? I think easy is a bad word. We don't like to say that, right? It's the easier part, right? Communication, I said before, like that's the hard part, right? Managing some of these things, culture is the hard part, right? And I think it's important for an organization to have a culture, or to have, what's the word I'm looking for? it'll come to me, right? But the organization has to support the concept that I'm talking about, right? They either do or they don't. They buy into these things or they don't. When the organization buys into it, then it makes it easier, right? And so what you have is you have a team that's responsible for certain things, whether it be a product or a feature within a product, right? Or multiple products or multiple features, right? And I tend to look at it as like a budgetary thing, okay? We're going to build Visual Studio, okay? And we know what our sales numbers are going to be, whatever it is, however you want to look at it. And we say that team that builds those tools for debugging, they get a certain amount of budget, right? And they get that team, and that team is going to work on as much stuff for them as they can because we built that team around their budget. You know what I mean? And we keep it consistent like that. And it doesn't mean we don't swing some people out here and there for emergencies. I mean, I know that there are real world scenarios. I'm talking a little bit about, the starting point of like trying to start from this. There's always a scenario where you yank somebody out in an emergency, right? I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. But you look at it as that team owns certain things, right? And so it's unfair to that team. So let's say that tools team, that debugging team that I'm making up here, they've got a team of 5 people that are working on that debugger. And the tool window team comes along and says, well, we have a problem. Can we have one of your people? Well, okay, now we're messing with things. I mean, like everything has a plus and minus to these things, right? So you're taking away from something else. And so the organization has to agree that we're changing the number one priority, right? We're saying that this other, and again, there can be give and take in these things. And there can be flexibility in these things. But what I find is that these are slippery slopes. Let's put it that way, right? And when you do something once, the next thing you know, you're like, well, let's have that person come and, come in and out of this project team all the time. And it just gets ugly. I think it really gets ugly. That's my soapbox.
Well, hey, if you are watching us live on Twitch right now, I think I would just love if I could just show you that, you're watching the Dev Talk Show, right? Broadcast Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. And if you're watching live on Twitch, we have a YouTube channel at youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. And if you happen to be watching us, and we're live right now, right? Developer Chat Live, right? So that's great. And if you are watching us from the future, meaning that you're catching a recording on YouTube, then right now we're recording on Twitch, twitch.tv/the Dev Talk Show. So the webpage is a little old, but you can find links to things like Twitch and YouTube and our talk with Carl Franklin on the front page. I think there's a refresh that may be coming
Can't believe
here.
You're promoting the website.
Well, I think sometimes people just want to remember a simple way to get things, right? So the devtalkshow.com. Yeah, right. We used to be on. It still
says we're live on Mixer.
Right. It's a little old, but that's all right.
That's cool. Yeah.
No big deal. So I also want to bring up something. We've been talking a little bit about, I don't know if this is a big old pivot or something, but, we talked about how the organization, does their culture keep teams kind of intact maybe, or they're not pulling resources from one or the other. So there is an essay here, How Do Committees Invent? It turns out this essay is more famous for a different reason than what you'd see from this title, written by Melvin Conway in 1968. And I guess there's something like 40 plus paragraphs. But there was a sentence apparently in the third to last paragraph that I imagine is more familiar to folks here. It's commonly known as Conway's Law. Any organization that designs a system, and then in parentheses, defined more broadly here than just information systems, end parentheses, will inevitably produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. So if we took what our organization's trying to do and perhaps one of the teams has been handed, let's just to keep it simple, they've been handed the website, and then another team has been handed like the data that they communicate with. Almost inevitably, what you're going to end up with, I don't think I'm wrong in saying this, is some kind of middleware service. We used to call this the business tier. Now we might call it a web API these days, or we're probably going to hand them an API, and that's going to be the disconnect because there's two different teams. Is that a good assertion, or am I missing that? Because the teams were broken up that way, we're going to build a web API for the front end web team to talk to, because how else are they going to talk to this other database team? We've got two teams, so they communicate more sparing. They're not in the same room all the time, so they're going to have to throw things at each other, and that might be represented by a RESTful API, or maybe, heck, it used to be stored procedures. We'll write a bunch of stored procedures for you to call. Right? There was a wall. Things were being thrown over. Didn't matter what the technology was.
Interesting.
That's I just thought maybe Conway's law makes that happen, right?
Okay. Trying to think about it a little bit. Like sometimes it's hard to.
Sure, these are abstract situations.
Yeah, to all of a sudden have a response. Like like Rich and I are both usually pretty good at that. Sometimes though, like you say something, you're like, let me think about that.
Yeah, what's he talking about?
React always. I don't. That one's just not. I don't know. I don't have something on that one.
Are we constrained? Like once we're trying to figure out how to build something, dividing people up to do it like almost seems constrained by, at least, well, what Conway's saying is constrained by how your organization's structure is. I've heard some people say, like, if you want to build microservices, like tell everybody to work from home or something, then by definition they'll produce microservices because they really can't communicate with each other. This was actually pre-COVID that I saw somebody say this, that there'll be no other way for them to communicate than to pass messages to each other. Therefore, those are the systems they'll build. Do I think that that's true? I don't know. I don't know that I have enough observation.
No, I don't know.
It certainly is.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Yeah. I'm just saying that's Conway's law is commonly cited in our business. So,
Sure. You were mentioning earlier, there was when I say Chris was mentioning, we have a back channel sometimes, and I can see in the back channel. Chris, you mentioned another one of Goofy's questions. Cloud native development versus server centric development, right?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever put it up there because we hadn't quite gotten around to it, but you're right. Yeah. It's been sitting there queued, right?
Okay. Yeah. So pop that one up. So what he says, can we, sorry, where is that? I can't see it because it's small on my screen. Can you read it? Or?
Yeah. Do you think cloud native development versus more server centric development changes team dynamics? Right. So today there's probably still a lot of applications that I don't even care if you're deploying to the cloud. That's not the point. That in the end, it's being deployed to a machine. It could be a website deployed to Nginx. Like, who cares? I don't even care if that server's in the cloud. The fact of the matter is there's one or more of them. But cloud native development is more of the small front end functions that then might communicate with independent. There could be more functions. Putting things on queues so that things that are just sitting there listening, waiting. They're waiting. They're not doing anything until work came on the queue. Let me do it. Do a little bit of work. Probably more accurately describe something that's cloud native. You're not trying to have any one server be in charge. So does that change the team? Does it change team dynamics? Does it change team dynamics? Maybe that's a better question. Is when you're is this part of it? Is when you're dividing up the work on the team, if you have the cloud native tools, do you divide it up differently?
So
I think there's. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let's make sure I think you're saying this, Chris. I think this is what you're saying, but I just want to make sure we're all saying this. Cloud versus cloud native, right? Putting it on the cloud, putting it on a server, it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cloud native, the implication is you're kind of doing it right in the cloud, right? You're breaking things up into smaller bits versus server centric. We're going to make that assumption that it's a little bit more monolithic, maybe, right? Because you can do microservice-y kind of stuff, and I don't want to use that term. I'm not using that term in the pure sense, but you can do little bits of things on the server side as well if you're really good. But I think we're trying to get at that design. Or if you're doing, I think, small cloud native, cloud the right way kind of stuff versus maybe an older way of doing things, right?
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely it. And the subsequent component that just little delayed, but just came off the screen, or is probably coming off the screen. So I'm now starting to talk about it. Talking about things that are related to events, talking about things that are related to a topic that we talk a little bit around serverless, right? Being able to have discrete bits of code only run when you really need them and have those kind of come apart. Can you do that in a server type environment? Yeah, sure. This little service only runs whenever we call it, that kind of thing. But the difference is that you pay for that a little differently when we think about moving those up to the cloud. And I think, the comment there, the last comment around data center in the cloud versus cloud native is how he described it. I think it's a good thing, right? So you can take that monolithic application, or the application that ran in that server environment, and just package it up and deploy it to a cloud, wherever that cloud might be. But if you really want to take advantage of that cloud, you need to start to re-architect it and pull out the various pieces so that they can run in processes that are a little more efficient, run in such a manner that you can take advantage of the cloud and scale them out, because those processes, or that part of the application, is the thing that's being the bottleneck. So instead of scaling the whole thing out by having, a dozen servers that supports this application, I only have this one service, and I may scale out that a dozen times because that's where the bottleneck is. So that's thinking about your application differently. And I don't think that changes the team dynamic. The team still, as a team perspective, still needs to do all the things we've kind of talked about: self-organize, be able to work in small teams, be able to communicate with each other, be able to work towards that common goal. So I think from that perspective there, the team dynamic is still going to be the same, but what they wind up building and how they wind up talking, those components wind up talking to each other, is a little different, right? I don't necessarily need to be part of your project directly with the DLLs and those things communicating together. You're going to send me some kind of a message that's going to be sitting on some queue. I know I need to talk to the queue, and I'm expecting that message that comes through the queue might have this topic, and that's what I'm listening for. It might have this kind of additional header information in that. I might process a little differently. So it's that kind of an interaction, I think, that happens when we start breaking things down more cloud native versus the big application that we're all working in together that's going to get deployed as part of one big deployment overnight session where we shut everything down and say this is going to get pushed out to production, right?
So I think if we change one word in the initial question, or we take out the word dynamic, right? Because it says, does the difference between cloud native and server centric, and I think we've established what we mean by that, change the team dynamics? And Rich, I agree with you that the dynamics don't change per se if we're using that word, but what if we said the team size or something like that? I do think that cloud native type of stuff, the things you were just talking about, Rich, lend itself pretty well to having several small teams versus having one big team. So that dynamic changes, right? As opposed to having a bunch of people maybe working on building the entire. Again, I'm assuming we mean sort of monolith versus more distributed, more broken apart stuff. I don't want to use microservices. That's a whole loaded thing. But that you sometimes you need that one bigger team, right? But now we can have a couple of teams that are working independently of each other towards a common goal, right? They need each other, but one team can say, "Yeah, I'm setting up a bunch of Azure functions that are going to do this core part of the business," and another team saying, "Yeah, I'll handle the event hub in the middle or whatever it is," and another team is I'm going to build a UI that calls, and another team is going to build the API, like all these different things. I think when you break it down like that, it does lend itself to smaller teams and smaller teams working together, right, towards a common goal. And I also think that I personally think that you and Rich, you were talking about the DevOps perspective there a little bit. I think DevOps works better for small teams. And I think, because again, you're doing less deployment. You might be doing a lot of them, but each one is smaller and things like that. You have less dependencies in the things. And I think that allows the teams to be more agile. And I think the whole thing starts to come together really well, right? Yeah. And like you're sort of, where some of these things were harder to do with agile. It was harder to have small teams when you're building the monolith or what, how do you put DevOps to each team and not, it was harder. When you get into splitting those things apart, I think these things like yield additional benefits that you don't think about, right? Sure, it's more scalable. Oh yeah, sure, I'm going to the cloud. I can push a button, right, Rich, and my Azure, and boom, I got scale. It's great, right? And I've got great monitoring. I mean, we could talk about the benefits of the cloud and Azure, a lot. But there are these other benefits that I don't think, people correlate. Like, look what it does for my team, right? Look how it makes it easier to build software, and have the teams work on independent projects and, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I went on for that for a while.
Just to go back to the one comment you did, because I think it's really important, and it's a conversation that I have with customers a lot as well. Hey, I want to go ahead and do cloud native. I want to do microservices. I want to do containers and Kubernetes. If you don't have a DevOps process in place, you're not going to get to the point where you can take advantage of all the things we're talking about in cloud native. That ability to deploy repeatably in a manner that is as automated and self-testing and as low touch as possible. If you don't have those things in place, you're not going to be able to take advantage of what we're doing, what's possible with a cloud native application. There's just too many moving parts. And yes,
yeah, I think so. I mean, listen, I could. I'm not arguing against that at all, right? But
no, I wouldn't think you would.
But no. But what I almost feel like you can't even build a monolith without a good like anyone who's like sort of down on on the DevOps process. I'm not using DevOps like Azure DevOps, but just CI/CD, all that stuff. I mean, come on, like hopefully we don't have to still have that, convincing people that that's the right way to go, right?
I know you don't have to convince them, but I will. Maybe you do have to convince them. You'd be surprised how many people come in and say, we've got this idea for an application. Let's talk about the design. We want it to be microservices. That's great. And one of the first things we say once we start designing all this stuff, that's great. This is all these great parts here. What's your DevOps process? Oh, we don't have one.
Right.
Start. Forget everything we just talked about.
Yeah,
that's where we got to
It's a
start.
good place to start. It's a good place to start, like doing your DevOps, because you're doing something new, and so yeah, DevOps, for the win, right? I mean, DevOps is, I don't know. It's hard to imagine. Some things I could imagine going back to a world before certain things. Not that one. It's pretty hard to imagine,
And part of, and this is probably getting into a tangent topic for another show, but part of the reason that we've had have had conversations with people and say we want to do microservices because we want to deploy faster, because we want to deploy more uniformly. We want to do all of the things that we think we're going to get by pushing our applications into the cloud, but they don't DevOps never came up as part of that conversation. So you're not going to get to one without the other. That's the important part. And it does take a little bit of showing and convincing to say, talk about what your deployment's like now and realize what's that going to look like if you're doing that, dozens of times across all the microservices or across the net, what's now a service bus or a messaging environment and functions and app services and those kind of things.
So hey, how about we tie this back to the topic of teams and team size, and I'll throw this out as a point. We can discuss it or argue it or whatever. I like having the DevOps done by the team, right? The team of developers that are working on this particular thing. Now, not every feature can be deployed. Again, let's just say we're building, an entire Windows or an entire Visual Studio. I guess you can't necessarily. I guess you can. I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example where this wouldn't make sense. But my point is that I think that the teams should have their own DevOps process, right? And they should own that, and they should build that, and they should be responsible for it. And I know some organizations have the DevOps team, the DevOps team. Oh, well, Try Goofy has the comment right there. I completely agree. If DevOps is not done by the team, is it really DevOps? Couldn't agree more. But I often hear people saying, well, yeah, our DevOps team is going to handle that for us or something like that. And I just think I don't think that works as well.
No. I have seen some, some experiences where, hey, we've got a DevOps team and they're responsible for the deployment and running the DevOps environment. And that's talking about what all that division of labor how all that works. Now, some of it was put in place because, hey, this DevOps is new for them. They're bringing in some people who, understand DevOps a little bit, have gone through those processes. And the ultimate goal is, yes, DevOps will get infused across the rest of the teams and the rest of the organization. Somebody needs to start it, own it, make sure it's happening, lest we fall back into those bad habits. But I think, if that's a short-term gap, I think that makes sense because, the whole purpose is uniting of the devs and the operations group together and the larger extent of business. And, the team goes across everybody who's got a stake in the application, basically. That's how it should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have been a witness to a DevOps organization. And I understand how it happens. I understand that there are some organizations in this world that are so big, they're wrestling so many people and projects and so forth that they feel they need a whole organization that defines, here are the things you will do, here are the secret handshakes you will perform in order to get your code built by our automated processes. And I found that there's a lot of resistance, because since it's no longer their responsibility, it's easy for teams to say that, well, we just don't have time to do that, right? And we've been doing it this way for a long time, perhaps even over 10 years. So, we just can't change right now. And then eventually, if there's enough money involved, you don't have to change because who wants to stop making money? So, and I'm not trying to be cynical about it. Other than that, I agree with the general statement that if DevOps isn't done by the team, then it's not DevOps. It just means that what you have is you have a build and implementation team that just has adopted a different name, and maybe they're using more modern tools. They're using a modern CI/CD tool set, where in the past it might have been pressing a CD. Now it's okay. So sure, you're using the modern tools. You're using the modern source control tools. I don't care what they are. I don't care if they're installed on premise or maybe you're using some enterprise cloud, like maybe it's GitHub or something. But you're just doing build and implementation by a different name. Mm-hmm. So, but I think it might be hard. It might be hard because if you're a large enough organization, can you really have can you really have everybody forging their own path? Which is to what you were saying. I think you might have said it in chat, Andy, about a DevOps center of excellence not being the same thing as a dedicated DevOps department that defines everything. They're defining exactly how and what you should commit and the rules you have to follow in order for everything to work out.
Yeah, I was trying to think
release
about
management. I'm sorry.
I was trying to say.
Yeah.
I was trying to come up with an example of something before, and it wasn't really coming to me. As you were saying it, it started to come together. Like you said, you can't always have every team going off and deploying everything. That could get a little tricky, like in certain environments, right? In certain products and things like that. But that doesn't mean that a team can't have some level of their DevOps, right? They should probably, often a team builds their own product, and it might and it might produce DLLs that get integrated into the bigger picture and stuff like that. So they could still have processes that do builds and push out to, internal NuGet repos and things like that. There's a lot of ways to build that so that the teams can have their own, you sort of own their own DevOps, even if they're not deploying the actual website to production. Like that might not be the thing that happens for them. And again, there's a million scenarios of things that can happen, but I think it's important to try, right? To try to, it's like, what do we say? We were talking about shifting left once on a show like a while ago. And it's like, we want to shift everything left. Like, this is an example where like, we got to try at least to do that. So yeah, it's cool.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, the concept of shifting left is I think we have plenty of research and even our own common sense that the earlier in the development process we catch a problem, and that doesn't necessarily mean a bug. It could be a design problem, a deployment problem, a configuration problem, a bug, a bad business rule. The cheaper it is to fix, because once it's out there in front of the customers, now it's really, really, really expensive to fix. You've got to rip what's not working out of the customer's hands, perhaps while they're using it, and maybe relying on it.
And there's something that another thing, we could talk about team size. And as it relates to what you just said, or team makeup and team size, I've also heard people saying, what we should do? We should split the team up and have one team that develops the features and develops the product, and another team that handles the bugs.
Yep.
Or the support calls for that, fixing that thing. And another aspect of it is, what about, we're talking about DevOps, and DevOps is not just CI/CD, right? It doesn't end at deployment, right? So who's monitoring the application? Who's making sure that things are working well? And I think these are all things that when you pull away from that core team, this is why I like having a team, right? Because there's when a team owns a product or a feature, they're going to continue to be responsible for it. If you work on project teams, the team is done. They did their work and they're done, and they go and then it gets disbanded and some other team takes it from there. So who's going to monitor it? Who's going to handle the bugs? Like, who's going to do all that kind of stuff? I think the more that stuff stays together on the core team, whether it be monitoring or whether it be that whole idea of like fixing the bugs and not, I think a good way to have a bad dynamic, yeah, I think that makes sense, is to split a team and say, hey, Rich, I want you to do all the new development. And Chris, will you monitor it for bugs as they come in from production and just fix all the problems that Rich might have introduced? We wouldn't say it like that, but every time Rich screws up, can you fix it for him? That's just not a happy model, right?
No, and I was actually one of the organizational aspects of trying to do software development. We did that. I was, there's a team that was focused on doing innovation and building applications and taking advantage of the latest and greatest technologies to build those applications. And there was another group that was really more the support triage type of capabilities. And you might look at the makeup of those teams and say they have different skill sets. And if you have people who kind of have those different skill sets, you might want to split them up and do that. I don't think it was nearly as successful as, I mean, there are pockets of it that worked because you had certain people who were in that triage troubleshooting role who were like, they got down to it and they could figure out what the root problem was in a way that, was very timely, right? So, and then you had the teams who obviously building new software was, that's what they love to do. So there were those, there's definitely personalities and mindsets that could fit into those. But overall, in the end, it wasn't a good success, right? There were pockets of it where it worked, but in the end, it ended up being trashed. So.
Yeah, and it seems like a good idea sometimes, right? And it might be one of those things that you do for a short term where you go, well, we're really up against, we got so many problems. Let's just peel off a few people, let them focus on getting us over that hump. That's okay, right? Sometimes we have to do that. And like you said, Rich, if you and Chris came to that agreement where Chris is like, I love slamming those bugs, and I'm so, that's, hey, great. But more often we hear like, Chris would say like, well, I have to fix the bugs, and then like, well, sorry, Chris, you're the new guy or something like that. And then again, we're just setting up a scenario that's not great,
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So if we say that a team is responsible not just for the development of some piece of software, but also its maintenance and deployment, what happens when they get overwhelmed? Because maybe there's a lot of problems with it and it doesn't even have to be problems that are necessary. See, oftentimes a bug is a mistake, but sometimes a bug is just a feature that wasn't understood until now. Like everybody told you this is how it was supposed to work and you believed them and they thought they were right and then found out, wait a second.
It's still a mistake.
Yeah, right.
Chris, it's still a mistake. It's just who made the mistake.
Well,
did the developer make the mistake? Did the BA make the mistake? Did the product owner just not even describe it well, right? But I get your point, right? These are all different things.
Yeah. Sometimes I don't even know if it's a mistake, but still.
Well,
anyways, the point is it doesn't, right. Now we're getting into semantics where when that team gets overwhelmed because unplanned work is coming in fast and furious, nobody planned on a mountain of bug fixes, change requests to solve problems. I don't care what we call them. Nobody planned on that. So how do we, is that where you add people or is that not help either? What do we do?
There are times when adding people can help, right? Sometimes, again, when we're talking about like getting over the hump or something like that, but it really depends. Like adding people isn't always so easy. They're busy. What people, is usually my answer. Like, what people am I going to add? I don't have a bunch of developers who are just like hanging out, waiting for some work to do, right? They're busy supporting the product that they own or support and things like that. So it gets kind of complicated. I think, again, I kind of look back at it as a budgetary thing. This team made their bed, right? And the team owns it, and they sort of usually have to deal with it when there's a lot of bugs. I try to keep it to that, like, because don't get me wrong, if I have more people, I would be happy to put them on the team. But robbing Peter to pay Paul, hey, Chris, sorry, the work that you need to get done is not going to get done because I'm taking your developers and I'm putting them on Rich's team,
Right.
So daughter's in the background. She's trying to sneak by carefully, I think. She's trying to not interrupt, but it's cute. So,
what you needed.
I think there's tough dynamics. Now, don't get me wrong. If budget isn't a problem, then great. But most places I know, they don't just have that many people they can move around. Or again, it comes down to number one priority. Okay, if the whole organization agrees that Rich's application is more important than yours, Chris, then I guess it's really not that big a deal for me to pull people to work on Rich's application, right? But usually you have different parts of the organization that all have their own set of priorities, right? And I'm going to crush your business model if I give your developers to Rich, right? So I don't think it's so easy. So I try to say, well, listen, this is your application. Sometimes you own a car. Sometimes your car breaks down, regardless of the fact that you plan to drive to vacation tomorrow. Sometimes your car breaks down and things have to change, right? It's not a great conversation to have, right? But it's one that I tend to have a fair amount. And I don't know if you guys, are get in the same boat at all,
I'm trying to think what to call that. Because we've had some good, I think, single word things like overlap, prioritization, communication. And this is like managing load.
Ownership. Cost of ownership.
Yeah, ownership. That's good. I like that. So team ownership, right? They own what they're doing.
They own what they're doing. And that's why, again, I don't like project teams. I like to say, well, that team is going to own this thing. They're going to build it. They're going to support it. It doesn't always work. Sometimes that's not the case, right? But I'm shooting for perfect world here kind of stuff,
Yeah. Earlier we were talking about like how often you get to file a new project, right? I don't know if it's putting Rich on the spot, but since you've talked about like some of the things you do with customers, it kind of sounds like that is something you get to do maybe more than I do. I mean, I can tell you about a job I had, actually maybe a lot of jobs I had, if I really stop and think about them, where it was come in and get to work on an existing project application, and that was it. It wasn't that. I mean, heck, I might have been there 5 years and I never, there was no new project because we're supporting we're supporting something. Word application is so nebulous, but that's the reality. But if you're getting to do that, then I don't know if you're getting to do that more. I don't know. So
it does happen a lot more, right? Because you're doing a demo for customers. Like, look, let's show how easy it is to get started writing a function. Let's show how easy it is to do a .NET MAUI application, right? And because those, typically aren't around, it's becomes a very quick show to say, or demo to show this is how easy it is to get started, right? And that's what you want to kind of help things out that way. And a lot of the development I do is focused on the newest, latest kind of technologies, or an idea to build out something that we haven't done before, that a customer may not have seen before, so that when they walk in, hopefully eventually, to our to the office and see, hey, here's this really cool experience that helps me understand what .NET MAUI is, or what containers are, or what serverless is. And because they're seeing it in a different light, like, oh, I can see that. That makes sense. That's pretty cool. Those kind of things are what I'm typically involved in building now, and that's very much file a new project, get started. So yeah, it's very, very different in not supporting a product and just being able to, every time some new feature comes out, say, oh, let's see what that looks like in a project.
Yeah, right. I'm wondering how that organization's team dynamics change now that maybe one or two of them or all of them got to experience that, and now they've got to bring that back. And again, like we talked about earlier, they want to have some overlap. You don't have one person come back and own it all because they happen to be the one that went to training, or they happen to be the one that sat with you. Because that happens. You send one or two people to training, and then they come back, and now are they the expert? Well, probably not, because I bet you it was a crash course.
Sure.
But
they're still the expert.
Yeah, but the team now has to build something. So that level of education, I think, is like that. Talk about not having overlap and having to figure out how to make that happen. How do you turn that into so that everybody on the team can be effective?
So in going down that path, right? We do that to show what it's like from the experience, right? But there is material, and whether it's the docs up on docs.com, I mean, for the stuff that I do, right? Stuff on docs.com, the stuff in Learn, which gives you full on learning path modules to do all the stuff that we're showing. So that's how you then spread the knowledge back to everybody back in the once you get back to the office, to say, hey, this is what things look like.
Yeah. So, if you are watching and maybe you're learning, maybe you're a new developer and you're learning on your own, or heck, maybe you're in school or some kind of boot camp or just having fun learning. That's the learning by yourself. I think generally you might have a mentor, a strong mentor. That would be great. If you knew some people who could help you out. But in the end, we're all going to end up going to work and having to work together with other folks, and maybe kind of mind melding with how they like to code. I mean, do you ever find, just as maybe a last bit, that Andy, or Rich, if you're going to do something on your own, there's things you like, language features you like, ways you like to name things and break things up. And is it easy for you to just put that aside when you go to work and you go, yeah, this team doesn't, maybe do something the way I like it, but that's okay. I can put it aside and follow that standard here at work? Or do you fight it a little bit? Or both? Maybe it's a little of both.
Well, for me, I mean, this is a place where I can cheat. This is easy. I'm the boss for. I'm not the boss.
Yeah,
I don't want to overstate that. But I design the standards and things like that. So like when it comes to those kind of things, I'm the boss, right? And people. So it's usually the way I like it to be.
Yeah,
I got you. Things on occasion where I. Someone else influences the standard, and I'll be like, all right, fine, we can do it that way. I mean, I'm flexible, and then I do it the way that that the team agreed to and stuff like that. But I don't know. That's a And Rich, you're usually working on demos and proof of concepts, right? So you probably do any naming you want, right?
Yeah, and I'm terrible at naming anyway, so there's that. But yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, so I will, if somebody else has a convention they want to use, I was like, all right, because I'm really not that good at the naming side of things to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah. That actually took me a little while to get used to, that it's okay to, if a team likes doing something a certain way, or this is what I've come into, but I'll tell you what is actually kind of hard is sometimes I'll look at a code base or join a team with a code base and find that there's all kinds of different things going on, because one person likes to do things one way, and heck, they're not even on the team anymore, and someone else likes to do things another way, and nobody seems to want to touch it, maybe out of fear of insulting other people. I'm not really sure what it is. I may have to dig into that a little bit more, but that sounds like another show. So to close this show, hopefully you're out here watching, whether it was on YouTube in the future or live, or if you watched on Twitch tonight. Thank you for joining us in the chat, providing some things for us to talk about. And if you have some more comments on this, if you're watching on YouTube, put those in the comments down below. I got to get my finger on screen so you can see. Comments down below, add to it, and we would be happy to hear from you. If you liked what we talked about, hit the like button so we know that you want more shows like this. And you hit that subscribe button or follow on Twitch, and you'll know when we go live. So I say next time we go live, Wednesday at 8:30 next week, I think. I can't think of any reason why we're not. So that sounds good.
Next week looks good.
Yeah, awesome. So hopefully you all had a good time. Look for us on Twitter, The Dev Talk Show, or the website, thedevtalkshow.com, and you can hear about what's coming up next. So if we're done, Rich and Andy, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, thanks. Good discussion.
And that's it. We'll see you all next time on the Dev Talk Show.